One effective foundation we haven't talked about actually when it comes to building a digital MVP or actually managing like any digital product is how we manage our design library, our design process, and also our front-end development process. We're going to go a deep dive into the topic of the design to development process in this video and show you why it's really important to do so. So essentially our goal with any design system and code base is for those to match each other really closely, right? So that when, for example, we are designing, let's say in Figma, right, we already have, let's say we're using H1 here, right? This H1 should match what we have in the code base, right? White or dark variation, completely fine, right? So these should match. Why do we do that? Well, one, for consistency, right? So that the customer has a consistent user experience. It's very visually easy to understand what's the important information, right? So we're not just throwing loads of different colors and typography styles at them. There's clear visual hierarchy. This is important. This is less important. This is even less important, right? Simple as that. However, also there are a few really, really important advantages beyond that. So particularly as a product manager, when it comes to, let's say, planning or brainstorming or running any workshops on new features, if we have a design system in place, it means we can be extremely quick when it comes to mapping out those wireframes in a live session, right? So we're aligning visually around something, right? That's because if we have all of these elements predefined, we simply, as we're planning, we can just go, great, add input, cool. Let's do inactive, blah, blah, blah. So we very quickly get a very realistic look and feel for what we're trying to achieve. And on the development side, what it means is that we are not always building things from scratch. Right? So rather than always building sort of custom button and custom input, we simply add one line of code like input button, and we have that element ready. So this is really what we want to aim for. I'm just going to show you how you can set that up so that, again, you don't need to be an expert, but you can ask the right questions to your designers, to your front-end developers as well, to make sure that that process is as smooth as possible. So let's look at the design system first. So ultimately what we want to have is what we call our atoms, or our sort of base level things like colors, typography, elevation, maybe also shape. So do we have soft corners or hard corners? And then we have our molecules and organisms, right? So that what we can also call components. So things that are made of color and shape and typography, such as button types. An icon, for example, has size, it has soft or hard corners, and it has color. The key principle here is that everything we build stems from the same base level atoms, right? So we are always using the same colors. We're always using the same kinds of typography. So if, for example, I change, at some point as a company, we change our primary color, it should do so in all of the important elements. Note that this is a darker color of yellow, right? So we can always change that across all of our components really quickly and really easily to reflect how we would also build that in code. So we can use Figma or Sketch for this. Ultimately what we want to have is we have our styles here, right? So color, typography, and we're always using pre-existing symbols. Let's just show a very basic example of this, of how we should be designing. So say, for example, I want a button. I can search, place the button. Say, for example, we want, some header text. I can use the existing style, or on mobile it's a little bit smaller. And important thing as well, let me just add a bit of text. Important thing as well is what happens. This is something designers miss out many times. What happens when this scales? What do we want it to do? So maybe it's that everything stays on the left, right, like this. So we pin it to the left and top. Maybe we actually want the button to always follow the right hand side, so it operates like this. Right. Do we want it to scroll down like this? Maybe not, so we fix it to the top and the bottom. This is ultimately how we build in Swift. We build iOS screens. So we have this nice flexible system that is all coming from existing components that we also have in the code base, so that when we then go over to the code base, I'm just going to set this up right now. Excellent. So when we go over to the code base, what we should see is these in action, right? So let's just show as an example. Say, for example, we want our headers and our button. So we have our header here and we have a button. So let's remove the old content. Right, then we have these two elements there. And obviously when we set, for example, the default, like is the header default in the center or the left, we can also update those in our code base as well. So see, we're just using one line here rather than needing to add all the CSS and change it again. We can also, depending on how we build it, make sure that our we have the different variations there as well. So again, rather than doing this big thing of CSS and custom building everything, we have it pre-prepared in our code base. We have button here and we have some variations of that which are defined in the CSS. So what's the difference between a secondary, primary, third level, fourth level, etc., etc. So again, that these match our Figma system as well. Then on a higher level, when we talked about the need for molecules and organisms, right? So we have these sort of more complex things, like, for example, let's take an example of a modal I think I have here. Let me just have a look. Let's take a page component. Right, so on the home page we have, let's say, this block that we reuse. That is something that we can build and that we reuse, and then we fill in the middle with the specific text we're using, but the styling is always the same. So let's test this out. So let's say, okay, great, I want to just remove all this stuff. Let's get rid of our button that we had there before in that header. Right, let's simply, so we're just using this pre-built thing called a description, and it's got a header, it's got some body text, it's got a button text, and it has a URL, let's say. Excellent. So we see that component here, right? So header text, body, and an image. In this case, actually, we have hidden the button, so it's non-visible, but usually we have something here. So ultimately, that's the goal with our design system and our code base. As I said, so when it comes to our design system, you should be pushing your designer to have everything built following atomic design principles. So again, that means everything comes from these base things: colors, elevation, shape, typography. Everything is built on those, so that if we at some point want to change, let's say, let's use the button again. So say, for example, we want to change our primary color, or let's take the secondary color actually in this case, then we can do so. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, we can do so, and then we change it on every other relevant element there. Again, advantage of this is then when it comes to doing wireframing, as a product manager, you can be the worst designer in the world, but you can start piecing things together. So, you know, okay, great, we have a search bar here, we've got a header here, we've got some text, and then a button, etc., etc. Far more effective to align your team than on the designer's side. It is far easier for your developer if everything is responsive, if everything is coming from existing components, so that they can simply add one line rather than custom building everything. So I hope that helps. Any questions, just feel free to ask. And yeah, that's it. So you can show this to your designer, developer if you'd like to as well. I'm going to actually make this video fully accessible to you below and a YouTube link, so that you can start moving towards this.